"Excuse me, little girl. Do you have any extra money for this seat?" The words cut through the hum of the engines like a knife. Heads turned. Passengers blinked, unsure if they'd heard correctly. But there she was, tiny, no older than 7, her braids tucked neatly under a faded pink headband, clutching her backpack as if it was her only shield. The flight attendant stood over her, arms crossed, tone sharp. "This isn't charity. If you want to sit here, you need to pay the extra rent." The child's lips quivered. She looked down at her shoes, worn and scuffed, as though searching for courage on the patterned carpet beneath her. She hadn't spoken to anyone since boarding. She was traveling alone, with instructions from her mother to stay quiet, to be brave. But bravery feels small when the world looms so large. The passengers around shifted uncomfortably. A man coughed. A woman frowned. Yet no one moved. No one spoke. Silence wrapped itself around the scene, making the girl smaller by the second. Her voice was barely a whisper. I don't have any money." The attendant leaned closer, as though savoring the power. "Then maybe you shouldn't be here at all." The little girl's fingers tightened around the straps of her backpack. Her eyes darted to the window, then to the aisle, searching for escape. She wanted to cry, but the tears burned too hot to fall. The world inside that plane had shrunk to just the two of them, the towering adult, armed with authority, and the fragile child, stripped of protection. The imbalance was suffocating. A boy in the row behind whispered to his mother, "Why is she being mean to her?" The mother shushed him quickly, lowering her gaze. Fear is contagious, and on that flight it spread faster than kindness. The attendant tapped the armrest. "Well, someone has to pay." The girl swallowed hard. For a moment, it seemed like she might give, in that she would break down entirely under the weight of those cruel eyes. Then, from deep within, a single word slipped out. Quiet, trembling, but carrying more strength than anyone realized. "Papa." It was not a scream. It was not even a call. It was a prayer, a plea carried in the softest breath. But it was enough to change the air, enough to ripple through the silence like thunder in the distance. The passengers glanced at one another, confused. Papa? Who was she calling for? The flight attendant blinked, thrown off balance. "Papa? Who's your papa?" The girl lifted her chin just slightly. Her eyes shimmered with the last line of defense she had. "My papa? He's the captain." And just like that, the power in the cabin shifted. The murmurs began. The quiet gasps spread row to row. The cruel demand, the humiliation, the imbalance, it all cracked beneath that single revelation. But the storm had only just begun. Because if her papa truly was the captain, then nothing on this flight would stay the same. And as the engines roared steady outside, the child's story was about to unravel in ways no one on board could have imagined. The story doesn't begin on the airplane. It begins hours earlier, in a quiet bedroom filled with the soft morning light. A small backpack sat open on the bed, its contents simple but precious. A favorite stuffed bear with one missing button eye. A folded note tucked inside an envelope with her name written in her mother's careful handwriting. And at the very top, a tiny box of crackers. "Just in case you get hungry," her mother had said. "Do I really have to go alone, Mama?" the girl whispered, her voice a mixture of fear and hope, as though wishing her mother might suddenly change her mind. Her mother knelt beside her, smoothing down the braids that framed her daughter's face. "Yes, baby. But remember, you're not really alone. Papa will be waiting at the other end. The moment you step off that plane, his arms will be right there." The child clung to that promise. She tried to picture it, her father's uniform, his smile, the way his voice always felt like safety. But in that moment, as she zipped the little bag shut, It felt like she was walking into the unknown. At the airport, the world grew louder, bigger. Rolling suitcases rattled against the tiles. Announcements boomed over speakers, their words too fast, too sharp for a young mind to follow. Strangers brushed past without seeing her, each one hurrying toward their own destinations. Her mother squeezed her hand tightly. "Stay close." At the gate, the goodbye came too soon. Her mother crouched, pulling her into an embrace that lingered just a heartbeat longer than usual. "Don't be afraid. Just sit quietly, follow instructions, and when the plane lands, you'll see Papa. Do you trust me?" The little girl nodded, though her eyes betrayed the fear she tried to hide. "I trust you." And then it happened. The boarding call. Passengers lined up, and the child's mother placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. "Be brave. You're stronger than you think." The child walked down the jet bridge, her backpack heavy not with belongings, but with the weight of responsibility far too large for her small shoulders. She didn't look back, because looking back would mean tears, and tears, she knew, would make it harder. Inside the plane, everything felt unfamiliar. The rows of seats stretched endlessly. The hum of the engines vibrated through the floor. She slid into her seat, folding her hands tightly in her lap the way her mother had taught her. She wanted to speak, to tell someone that this was her very first time flying alone, that her papa was the captain, that she was both scared and proud all at once. But the words stayed locked inside. Instead, she stared out the window, watching the ground crew move like ants below. In her heart, she repeated her mother, R's words again and again. "Papa will be waiting. Papa will be waiting." That fragile hope was the only shield she carried with her into the sky. And soon, that fragile hope would be tested by a cruelty she could never have imagined. "Little girl, seats like this aren't free." The words sliced through the hum of the cabin. The flight attendant's voice carried just enough volume to draw attention, but not enough compassion to soften the sting. Heads turned. Passengers glanced up from magazines and phones. The child froze. Her fingers tightened around her backpack straps. She didn't understand. She had a boarding pass. The seat was hers. Why was she being questioned? The attendant leaned closer, her lips tight, her eyes sharp. "You'll need to pay extra if you want to stay here. Otherwise, I'll have to move you." The little girl's eyes widened. But Mama already paid." Her voice trembled, a fragile thread in the storm. A heavy silence fell over the rows around her. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A businessman adjusted his tie but kept his eyes on his laptop. A woman beside the window lowered her gaze, pretending to be asleep. No one intervened. The attendant's gaze hardened. "Don't play games with me. You can't expect special treatment." And then came the unspoken truth, the cruel undertone that rippled beneath her words. The little girl's dark skin, her small frame, her solitude. They made her an easy target, easy to corner, easy to dismiss, easy to humiliate. The girl swallowed, her small voice breaking. "I don't have any more money." "Then maybe," the attendant snapped. "You don't belong in this seat." Gasps echoed faintly, muffled and hesitant. A man in the aisle seat cleared his throat as if to say something, then stopped. Fear of confrontation is powerful, even at 30,000 feet. The child's heart pounded. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes, but none of them came to her aid. She was utterly alone. "Please," she whispered, almost inaudible. "I'm supposed to sit here." The attendant straightened, crossing her arms. "Not without the payment. I'll give you one more chance." The injustice clung to the air like smoke. It was more than a demand for money. It was a performance of dominance, played out for an audience too afraid to intervene. The girl's lips quivered, her breath shallow. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the fabric of the seat and escape the piercing stare above her. She thought of her mother's words, of the promise that Papa would be waiting. But Papa wasn't here now. A child in the row behind whispered to his father, "Why is she talking to her like that?" His father hushed him quickly, avoiding eye contact with the attendant. Silence remained the easiest shield. And yet, silence is also complicity. The girl lowered her head, her voice no more than a trembling breath. "I can't pay." The attendant's jaw clenched. She placed a firm hand on the seat. "Then I'll have to remove you." Her words hung in the air like a verdict. The passengers stiffened. Some wanted to look away. Others couldn't tear their eyes from the scene. The cruelty was undeniable, but still no one moved. The child shut her eyes tightly, gripping her backpack as if it could protect her. Inside her chest, her heart screamed louder than her voice could. She wanted to cry for help, but she didn't know who would listen. And then, a single thought surfaced, a single word, a single name. The one person who would never let her be treated this way. Her lips parted, preparing to whisper the word that would shift everything. The word that would change the flight forever. The cabin was silent, heavy with judgment and fear. All eyes lingered on the little girl, waiting to see if she would surrender or be dragged away. Her chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. The hum of the engines was the only sound giving her courage. And then she spoke. Not with anger, not with defiance, but with the soft, test voice a child could summon. "Papa!" The single word barely escaped her lips, yet it carried through the cabin like a secret the air itself was desperate to share. A word spoken not just in fear, but in faith. Faith that someone, somewhere, would hear. The flight attendant blinked, thrown off for the first time. "Papa," she repeated, confusion dripping from her tone. She leaned closer, her authority faltering. "Who's your papa?" The girl's trembling eyes lifted. Her small voice, broken but clear, gave the answer that shattered the imbalance. "My papa is the captain." The words hung in the air like thunder. Passengers shifted in their seats, their silence cracking under the weight of the revelation. Murmurs began to ripple through the rows. A man in the back whispered, "Did she say, the captain?" A woman clutched her chest, her eyes wide. The attendant's face paled, her composure wavering. She hadn't expected this. She thought she was cornering a powerless child. But now, the very authority of the flight itself was tied to the girl she tried to humiliate. The child's small frame straightened just slightly, her fear momentarily overshadowed by hope. The single name, the single bond to her father, had tilted the balance of power. Passengers who moments before stayed silent now exchanged glances, their discomfort turning into outrage. The injustice that was easy to ignore had suddenly become impossible to deny. Because this wasn't just a child, it was the captain's child. The flight attendant stepped back, her eyes darting nervously down the aisle, as though the walls of the plane were closing in on her. She forced a shaky smile, trying to mask her panic. "Oh, the captain, is it?" But it was too late. The whisper had already grown into a storm. The word Papa carried more weight than any uniform, any title. It was a reminder that even the smallest voice can echo with unimaginable power. And at that moment, passengers knew one thing. The captain would have to hear of this. The balance of the flight was about to shift forever, and soon the man behind the controls would step forward, not just as a pilot, but as a father. The whisper of Papa still floated in the air when the call button was pressed. The flight attendant's stiff smile masked a storm beneath her skin. She leaned toward another crew member and muttered under her breath, "Get the captain, now." Passengers shifted in anticipation, their eyes flicking toward the cockpit door, as though waiting for a curtain to rise on the most important act of a play. The child clutched her backpack tighter, hope and fear colliding in her small chest. Moments later, the cabin door clicked. Slowly, deliberately, it swung open. And there he was. The captain stepped into the aisle, tall, composed, the polished uniform carrying the weight of authority. His presence commanded silence without effort. Passengers straightened instinctively, as though acknowledging not just a pilot, but a guardian of every soul on board. "Is there a problem?" His voice was calm, steady, but carried a steel edge beneath it. The flight attendant rushed to explain, words tumbling nervously. "Oh, Captain, it's nothing serious. Just a seating issue with this child here." Her attempt at control faltered as the little girl rose slightly from her seat. Her eyes glistened, lips trembling. She whispered again, stronger this time, "Papa." The captain's gaze snapped to her, and in that instant, the room shifted. The calm professionalism in his face melted into something raw. Recognition. His jaw tightened, and his steps quickened as he crossed the aisle to kneel beside her. "Sweetheart, what's going on? Why are you crying?" His voice softened, the kind of tenderness that only a father could carry. She buried her face against his shoulder, her words broken between sobs. She said I had to pay more. She said I don't belong here." The captain's arms wrapped around her, protective, unyielding. His eyes, once calm, now blazed with fire. He rose slowly, turning toward the attendant who had moments ago towered over his daughter. "Is this true?" His tone was measured, but the weight behind it was crushing. The attendant faltered. I was only following procedure. She didn't have proof." "Proof?" His voice cut like steel. "She had a boarding pass. She had a seat. And she had my name written in every line of her soul. That's all the proof she ever needed." Passengers leaned forward, holding their breath. The confrontation was no longer between crew and passenger. It was father against injustice itself. The attendant stammered, I wasn't trying to—" "To what?" His voice thundered now, echoing through the cabin. "To humiliate a child? To use your position to belittle her? To make her feel she doesn't belong in a world where she has every right to exist?" The silence afterward was deafening. The hum of the engine seemed to vanish under the force of his words. The little girl peered from his arms, her tear-streaked face shining with relief. For the first time since the journey began, she felt safe. Not because of the seat, not because of the plane, but because Papa was here. The captain straightened, his eyes never leaving the attendant. Authority radiated from him, not from the uniform, but from the unshakable truth of a father protecting his child. "You work under my command," he said, his voice low but powerful. "And under my command, cruelty has no place in this cabin. Not today, not ever." The passengers erupted in quiet murmurs, nods, and whispers of approval. Some clapped softly, unable to hold back their support. The flight attendant's shoulders sagged. The fight gone from her. Shame replaced the arrogance she once carried. But this was not yet the end. The captain had spoken as a father. Now, he would demand accountability as a leader. And what came next would not only be a reckoning for one attendant, but a lesson for everyone on board. The captain's words still echoed through the cabin when the silence finally broke. "Explain yourself," he demanded, his voice sharp but steady. His uniform caught the dim cabin light, reminding everyone that this was not just a father speaking, it was the leader of the entire flight. The flight attendant shifted uncomfortably. Her once rigid posture now seemed small, her authority crumbling in front of dozens of watching eyes. "Captain, I didn't mean any harm. I was just following standard checks." The captain's eyes narrowed. "Standard checks do not include demanding rent from a child. Standard checks do not include making passengers feel unworthy because of the way they look." His words cut deeper with each sentence. "What you did wasn't procedure. It was prejudice." The attendant's mouth opened, then closed. She had no defense. For a moment the cabin held its breath, caught between outrage and hesitation. And then, slowly, voices began to rise. "I saw it," a woman in row 7 said firmly. "That little girl did nothing wrong." Another man, his voice louder, added, "She showed her boarding pass. You still tried to push her." The murmurs spread like wildfire. Passengers who had sat silently now found the courage to speak, their guilt turning into solidarity. "You singled her out," one whispered. "You thought no one would say anything." The attendant's eyes darted nervously from face to face. She had counted on silence. She hadn't expected the silence to shatter. The captain stood tall, his hand resting gently on his daughter's shoulder. "This is what happens when people stay quiet," he said, addressing not only the attendant but the entire cabin. "Cruelty grows in the dark. Injustice thrives when good people look away." The weight of his words pressed against every passenger. Some lowered their eyes in shame, realizing they had watched without intervening. Others nodded solemnly, feeling the sting of truth. The attendant's excuses faltered completely. I didn't think it would matter. She's just a child." "Just a child?" the captain's voice boomed. "She is my child, and every single passenger on this plane is my responsibility. To you, she may have looked small, alone, easy to dismiss. But to me, she is everything, and to this flight, she is proof that your uniform means nothing without compassion." The cabin erupted in applause. Not thunderous, but steady, like the heartbeat of collective justice finally awakened. Tears welled in the child's eyes, not of fear this time, but of relief. She clung to her father's arm, feeling the strength she had lacked moments before. The attendant broke down, her arrogance shattered. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely audible. "I wasn't thinking. I shouldn't have—" The captain's gaze softened, but his voice remained unyielding. "Apologies do not erase actions. What matters now is that you understand the weight of what you've done, and that everyone watching understands it too." He turned to the passengers once more. "Remember this moment. Remember how easy it is to ignore, and remember how powerful it is to speak up." The applause swelled again, louder this time, carrying through the cabin like a wave of redemption. The attendant stood frozen, her uniform suddenly feeling like a costume she no longer deserved to wear. The captain took his seat beside his daughter, his presence a fortress of safety. The little girl leaned against him, whispering softly, "Thank you, Papa." He kissed her forehead and whispered back, "Always." But even as the warmth of resolution spread, everyone in that cabin knew. The reckoning wasn't truly over. The apology was only the beginning. What came next would test forgiveness, justice, and the strength of a father's love. The tension hung heavy, but something had cracked. The proud, sharp-edged mask of the flight attendant was gone, replaced by trembling lips and eyes brimming with regret. Her authority had collapsed under the weight of truth. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the cabin demanded more. Silence pressed in, urging her to face the shame fully. She swallowed hard, her voice louder now. I was wrong. I should never have spoken to her like that. I let my frustration, my prejudice, guide me." Her words stumbled, But they were no longer coated in arrogance. They were raw, naked, unguarded. The captain stood tall beside his daughter, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. His gaze remained stern. "Apologies matter," he said, his voice steady, "but only when they're matched with change. Cruelty has no place in the skies. Not in this cabin, not in this crew, not in this world." His words struck deeper than any reprimand could. They carried both the authority of his rank and the fury of a father who had seen his child wounded. The little girl leaned against him, her small fingers gripping his sleeve. For the first time, she allowed the tears to fall. But they were no longer tears of humiliation. They were tears of release, of knowing she was no longer alone in the fight. The passengers responded, almost instinctively. One by one, soft claps began to echo through the cabin. At first hesitant, then louder, stronger, until the entire space filled with applause. It wasn't for the captain alone. It wasn't only for justice being spoken aloud. It was for the little girl, the child who had endured what no child should, and who had reminded them all of their own silence. The attendant bowed her head, tears slipping free as she whispered again, "I'm sorry." This time, no one doubted the sincerity, but apologies, as the captain had said, were only the beginning. He turned to his daughter, kneeling so his eyes met hers. "You are brave," he told her softly, "braver than anyone here. Remember that. You never need to shrink yourself to fit into somewhere." "Eon else's cruelty." She nodded, her voice faint but steady. "I tried, Papa. I tried to be brave." His smile, gentle and proud, broke through the sternness. "And you were. You called for me when it mattered. That was enough." The applause swelled again, and this time it was accompanied by murmurs of support. Passengers reached out with kind smiles, small gestures of comfort, silent promises that she was seen, she was valued. The humiliation that once suffocated her had transformed into something else: vindication. She was no longer the powerless child singled out in the aisle. She was the daughter of the captain, shielded by truth and lifted by justice. The power dynamics had reversed completely. The one who had towered above her now stood bowed in apology, while the child, once trembling in fear, was lifted into strength. The cabin settled into quiet again, but it was no longer the silence of complicity. It was the silence of reflection, the silence of passengers who knew they had witnessed something they would never forget. The captain kissed his daughter's forehead, holding her close. "It's over now," he whispered. "You're safe." But deep down, everyone knew. The lesson of that moment wasn't just for her. It was for all of them. And as the plane carried them closer to its destination, the story wasn't finished yet. There was still one final landing and one final lesson that awaited them all. The engines roared softer as the plane began its descent. Outside the windows, clouds parted to reveal the city below, glittering under the fading light of day. Passengers shifted in their seats, fastening belts, collecting belongings. But inside the cabin, no one's mind was on the landing. Their thoughts lingered on what they had just witnessed. The little girl sat quietly, her small hand wrapped safely in her father's. She no longer clutched her backpack like a shield. Instead, she leaned against him, her tears dried, her eyes heavy but calm. The captain glanced down at her, his voice low and steady. "You see, sweetheart, even the smallest voice can carry across the sky." She blinked up at him, whispering, "But I was so quiet. I only said one word." "One word," he nodded. "But it was the right word, spoken at the right moment. That's all it takes to change everything." The cabin echoed with quiet agreement. Passengers who had clapped earlier now looked inward, each replaying the moment in their minds. Some felt guilt for staying silent. Others felt inspired, realizing they should never let silence be their shield again. The attendant sat further down the aisle, her eyes lowered, tears staining her cheeks. She had been humbled, stripped of the power she once misused. And though shame weighed on her, she too was learning that uniforms mean nothing without humanity. The wheels touched down with a soft jolt. The cabin trembled, but this time the turbulence was not in the air. It was in their hearts. Every soul on board carried a new awareness, a reminder that injustice does not always scream. Sometimes it whispers. And when it does, it takes courage to listen. As the plane rolled toward the gate, the little girl squeezed her father's hand. "Papa?" "Yes, my love." "Would you have come, even if I didn't call?" His answer was immediate, steady as the earth beneath them. "Always. But I'm proud you called. You trusted your voice, and that makes you stronger than you know." Her small smile returned, the kind of smile that only comes when fear gives way to strength. The captain stood, his voice carrying once more through the cabin. "Let this flight be more than just a journey. Let it be a reminder. Prejudice and cruelty are as dangerous as storms in the sky. Silence, when faced with injustice, is its own kind of turbulence. But courage, compassion, and justice, these are the wings that keep us steady." The words sank deep into the hearts of everyone listening. For some, it was a lesson they had long forgotten. For others, it was the first time they truly understood it. The seatbelt sign blinked off. Passengers rose slowly, still subdued, carrying not just bags but a story they would share long after this flight. The little girl stood beside her father, her head held a little higher than before. She had boarded the plane alone and afraid. She walked off with her father's hand in hers and the quiet power of knowing her voice could change the world. And so the story ended not with anger, but with a lesson that lingered like contrails in the sky. Cruelty may rise, silence may spread, but truth, spoken with courage, will always land safely